Richard Carter's palm struck the dining table so hard that the glasses rattled. "You'll never walk through these doors again." The room went silent. Every pair of eyes shifted toward me, waiting to see whether I would argue, cry, or beg. My younger brother, Daniel, leaned back in his chair with the smallest smile, as though he'd been expecting this moment all along. My mother lowered her gaze to her plate without saying a single word. I looked at my father. His finger was still pointing toward the front door. "I gave you one chance," he said. "Either you put your plans aside and help your brother, or you stop calling yourself part of this family." No one questioned why the responsibility had landed on me again. No one reminded him that I had already spent years paying overdue bills, covering emergencies, and fixing problems I never created. The entire room waited for my answer. I reached for my coat. "If you leave," my father said, his voice echoing through the dining room, "don't ever expect to walk through these doors again." I paused for only a second. Then I opened the door and walked out. I didn't slam it. I didn't defend myself. I simply left. The cold night air hit my face as I crossed the driveway, but my phone began vibrating before I even reached my car. One message after another. "How could you do this to your family? Your father sacrificed everything for you. You're choosing money over blood." I read every message. Then I placed the phone on the passenger seat and drove away. For years, I had believed that if I worked harder, earned more, and gave more of myself, eventually my father would see me the way he saw Daniel. Every promotion I delayed, every vacation I canceled, every dollar I handed over had been another attempt to prove I deserved a place in my own family. Apparently, all it took to erase 33 years of loyalty was saying one simple word. No. The opportunity my father demanded I abandon wasn't a fantasy. It was the biggest step of my career, a partnership I had spent years quietly building. Daniel had just lost another business after months of reckless spending, and my father expected me to empty my savings to rescue him once again. When I refused, my father didn't call me responsible. He called me selfish. Before dessert was served, he had announced to everyone at the table that I was no longer welcome in his home. Not one relative challenged him. Not even my mother. After that night, I disappeared from every family gathering. I changed nothing except where I invested my energy. I answered no accusations. I asked for no apologies. Exactly 1 year later, I was reviewing lease agreements in my office when my desk phone rang. "Ms. Carter," the security supervisor said carefully, "there are 3 visitors downstairs." "Do they have an appointment?" "No." "Who are they?" There was a brief pause. Then he answered quietly. "Your parents and your brother." I stood and walked to the floor-to-ceiling window, overlooking the entrance. They weren't demanding. They weren't shouting. They were simply standing outside the front doors of my building. Then the supervisor spoke again. "They're asking if they can come inside." Richard didn't leave. Neither did my mother. Through the security camera mounted above the entrance, I watched the 3 of them standing in the afternoon sun. My father had always hated waiting. At restaurants, he complained if the food took 10 minutes. At banks, he'd walk out rather than stand in line. Now he stood quietly outside my building, like every other visitor. "Would you like me to send them away?" the security supervisor asked. I kept watching the monitor. "No." A few seconds passed. "Tell reception to book them for 4 o'clock. There was a pause. "They don't have an appointment." "They do now." I hung up. For the first time in my life, my father would have to wait because of me. The next 3 hours passed in meetings. I reviewed contracts, approved construction budgets, and signed paperwork for 2 new commercial tenants. Every so often, my assistant would quietly step inside my office. "They're still downstairs." I nodded without looking up. "Have they caused any problems?" "No." That surprised me. The father I remembered would have demanded to see a manager within 5 minutes. Instead, he sat silently in the lobby. At exactly 4 o'clock, I left my office and stepped into the private elevator. As the doors opened into the lobby, conversations softened. "Good afternoon, Ms. Carter." The receptionist smiled. "So nice to see you." Another employee hurried over. "The legal documents you requested are ready. I'll review them after this meeting." Of course. Every greeting was calm, professional, respectful. I noticed my father's eyes following each interaction. Years ago, he used to tell everyone I would never become leadership material because I was too soft. Now dozens of employees trusted me to lead them. Richard slowly stood as I approached. For a moment, neither of us spoke. He looked older. His shoulders were lower than I remembered. The confidence that once filled every room had quietly disappeared. My mother stepped forward first. "Evelyn." Her voice trembled. "It's been a long time." "It has." She reached as though she wanted to hug me, then stopped herself. Daniel stayed behind our parents. He couldn't meet my eyes. That alone felt unfamiliar. Growing up, he never avoided eye contact. Why would he? He was always protected. Whenever he failed a class, Dad blamed the teacher. Whenever he quit another job, Dad blamed the company. Whenever he borrowed money and never repaid it, Dad told me to be understanding. I remembered the Christmas when Daniel wrecked his third car. Dad had walked straight into my apartment. "I need $20,000. I laughed because I thought he was joking. He wasn't. "It's family." I emptied nearly all of my savings. Daniel never thanked me. The next summer, he bought a fishing boat. Another memory surfaced. I had declined a promotion that required relocating because Mom had surgery scheduled. Someone needed to drive her to appointments. Daniel lived 15 minutes away. He never showed up. Dad called me a wonderful daughter. 2 weeks later, Daniel missed another mortgage payment. Dad looked at me again. "Can you help your brother one more time?" There was always one more time. Back in the lobby, Richard cleared his throat. "I know you're busy." "I am. I won't keep you long." I looked toward the reception desk. "Do you have a conference room available?" The receptionist checked the schedule. "Yes, Ms. Carter." "Book 30 minutes." She nodded immediately. "Right away." Richard watched the exchange in silence. The realization settled across his face. This wasn't borrowed success. This wasn't luck. Everything here moved because I asked it to. As we walked toward the conference room, Richard slowed beside the receptionist. He hesitated before speaking. "Could you tell Evelyn something for me?" The young woman smiled politely. "What would you like me to tell her, sir?" My father lowered his head. "Tell her I was wrong." Richard remained standing even after the conference room door closed behind us. My mother sat quietly at the far end of the table. Daniel chose the chair closest to the exit. No one seemed comfortable. I took my seat first. "You said you only needed 30 minutes. Richard nodded. "I did." "So, what is this meeting about?" He glanced toward Daniel before answering. "We need your help." There it was. Not "how have you been?" Not asterisk "I'm sorry." Not even "I missed you." Just business. I folded my hands on the table. "What kind of help?" Richard hesitated. Daniel finally spoke. "Our lease expires next month. And the landlord isn't renewing." I waited. There isn't another property available that's large enough. Still, I said nothing. Richard slowly slid a folder across the polished table. "We heard you own several commercial buildings." "I do. We're hoping one of them is available." I looked at the folder without touching it. So this meeting is about leasing space. Richard swallowed. Yes. Outside the conference room, employees continued moving through the hallway. A few people glanced through the glass wall before continuing their conversations. Everyone knew who I was. No one knew who my visitors were. The receptionist walked in carrying bottled water. Anything else you need, Ms. Carter? No, thank you. She smiled politely and left. Richard watched the exchange. You've built quite a place. I've worked for it. He nodded slowly. I can see that. A knock interrupted us again. Excuse me. One of my property managers stepped inside carrying blueprints. Sorry to interrupt. He noticed the visitors. Oh. I stood. What is it? We finalized the agreement with Westbridge Manufacturing. Excellent. They'll occupy Building 3 beginning next quarter. Perfect. He smiled. Congratulations. As he left, Richard quietly asked, How many buildings do you own now? 7. The answer lingered in the room. Daniel looked down at the table. I finally opened the application folder. Inside were financial statements, profit and loss reports, outstanding loans, cash flow projections. Several pages immediately caught my attention. Revenue had fallen sharply. Operating expenses had climbed. 2 major contracts had disappeared. Then I reached the final page. The company name froze me. Carter Industrial Supply. I looked back up. You transferred the business into its own corporation. Richard nodded. 5 years ago. So this lease application isn't personal. No. It's for the company. Yes. As I continued reading, another detail stood out. The requested warehouse size. The loading dock specifications. The transportation requirements. I knew them by heart. My logistics company specialized in serving businesses exactly like this. Only one type of operation required this particular layout. Only one reason justified relocating so urgently. I slowly closed the folder. Richard leaned forward. So, his voice barely carried across the table. Is one of your buildings available? I didn't answer immediately. Instead, I opened the folder again and read every page. The silence became uncomfortable. Richard shifted in his chair. Daniel rubbed his hands together. My mother kept staring at the tabletop. Finally, I spoke. When did your bank call the loan? Richard looked surprised. They haven't called it yet. They've frozen your credit line. His eyes widened. How did you? It's in your financial statements. I turned one page around and slid it toward him. This ratio here. Your lender stopped extending operating credit months ago. No one said anything. You've been surviving on reserves. Richard slowly nodded. Yes. I continued reading. 3 supplier contracts had been marked as terminated. Insurance premiums had increased. Payroll expenses had been reduced. Employees had already been laid off. This isn't a lease problem, I said quietly. It's a survival problem. Daniel looked up. We've tried everything. Have you? My voice remained calm. Or did you wait until there were no other options? No one answered. I closed the folder. When did you lose the Harrison account? Richard frowned. 6 months ago. And the Northgate contract. His expression changed. About 4 months. The Fulton distribution agreement. His shoulders dropped. Last month. I already knew the answer. Each one of those contracts had transferred to companies inside my logistics network. Not because I targeted my father's business. Because my company had consistently delivered what clients needed. Reliability. Speed. Transparency. The market had chosen. Richard let out a slow breath. I didn't know. I know. He looked at me. I never realized your company had become this. I didn't smile. You never asked. Daniel finally spoke. We thought you were managing properties. I do. And logistics. And commercial development. And supply chain consulting. His eyes widened. You own all of that. I built all of that. Richard leaned forward. There was a time. His voice caught. When I thought you'd eventually come back. I remained silent. I believed you'd realize family mattered more than business. I met his eyes for the first time since the meeting began. I never chose business over family. He looked confused. You made me choose between my future and my brother's mistakes. The room fell silent again. My mother quietly wiped away a tear. You paid our medical bills, she whispered. You helped with the mortgage. You even covered Daniel's debts. She looked toward Richard. And we acted like none of it mattered. Richard closed his eyes. For several long seconds, no one moved. When he finally opened them again, the confidence that had defined him for decades was gone. If we lose this building, he said softly, the company won't survive. Our house is already being refinanced. Daniel still owes money from the last business. I've run out of places to turn. He looked down at the table, then back at me. I never told you what really happened that night. Richard stared at the table for several seconds before speaking. The company wasn't failing because of Daniel. His voice had lost every trace of authority. It started long before that. He rubbed his hands together as though trying to warm them. About 18 months before that dinner, our biggest client announced they were leaving. Then another followed. Creditors started calling. The bank demanded new guarantees. He looked at me. I was terrified. No one interrupted him. I couldn't admit I'd made mistakes. I couldn't admit I had expanded too quickly. I couldn't admit the business I'd spent 30 years building was slipping away. He swallowed. So when Daniel's company collapsed, I convinced myself that if you invested your savings, I could save everything. I asked quietly, why didn't you ask? I did ask. No. I shook my head. You demanded. The room fell silent again. Richard lowered his eyes. You're right. I thought if you refused, he continued, you had chosen your career over your family. He gave a bitter laugh. The truth was, I chose my pride over my daughter. No one spoke. I couldn't face everyone knowing I had failed. So I made you the villain. My mother covered her mouth as tears rolled down her cheeks. I should have stopped him, she whispered. I knew it wasn't fair. She looked at me with red eyes. You carried this family for years. I remembered every late-night phone call asking for money. Every emergency. Every birthday I skipped because someone else needed help. Every promotion I delayed. Every promise that things would be different. They never were. I leaned back in my chair. The partnership you wanted me to abandon. Richard nodded slowly. I accepted it the Monday after I left. His expression froze. The investors believed in my logistics model. We started with one warehouse, then another, then property development. When companies asked for integrated distribution, we expanded again. I looked around my office. Everything you see today grew from the opportunity you wanted me to walk away from. Richard closed his eyes. If I had simply supported you, you wouldn't be sitting here asking for a lease. He nodded once. I know. Daniel finally spoke. I owe you an apology too. He couldn't look directly at me. I kept letting everyone believe you would always fix everything. You never complained. So I kept taking. His voice cracked. I didn't realize what that was costing you. I appreciated the honesty. But honesty couldn't erase years of choices. I slid the application folder back across the table. I won't rescue your company. Richard didn't argue. I don't expect you to. But I also won't punish your employees for decisions they didn't make. His head lifted. I've reviewed your application. I opened another folder. This is a standard commercial lease. No special pricing. No family discount. No hidden penalties. The exact agreement every approved tenant receives. Richard stared at it. You'd still lease to us. If your company satisfies every financial condition. The same rules. The same review. The same obligations. No exceptions. For the first time that afternoon, he smiled. It wasn't the proud smile I had grown up seeing. It was smaller. Humbler. That's more kindness than I've earned. News of the meeting spread through the family within days. The relatives who had once flooded my phone with accusations learned why my father had really thrown me out. He hadn't defended the family. He had protected his pride. Several of them called to apologize. Some admitted they had believed every word he said about me. Others quietly confessed they had always suspected there was more to the story. My father didn't argue with any of them. For the first time in his life, he accepted responsibility without shifting the blame. Months later, Carter Industrial Supply moved into one of my commercial buildings. Every payment arrived on time. Every lease condition was honored. Richard treated my staff with the same respect he once reserved only for people he considered equals. Whenever business required us to meet, he knocked before entering my office. He never assumed the door would be open. Family gatherings eventually returned. Not because old wounds disappeared, but because new boundaries were respected. No one asked me to solve anyone else's financial problems again. No one expected sacrifice simply because I was dependable. And I never again confused love with obligation. One evening, after another routine business meeting, Richard paused outside my office door. Years earlier, he had pointed to his own front door and told me I would never walk through it again. Now he stood quietly, waiting for permission to leave mine. "Thank you," he said softly. I nodded. "Take care, Dad." He walked out, gently closing the door behind him. I looked toward the entrance of my office, the same kind of doorway that had once marked the end of one chapter of my life. The difference now was simple. This time, I chose who walked through it.